This week in Washington, a few of the most important U.S. institutions are facing what you could really only call a perfect storm of pressure. We're going to break down 3 stories that might seem separate on the surface, from the Federal Reserve to the EPA, but when you put them together, they paint a pretty startling picture of a system under some serious strain.
So let's just dive right in. The whole thing really boils down to this one question. What actually happens when the people in charge of steering the entire economy are, for all practical purposes, flying completely blind?
And that brings us to the first major issue, the Fed's data problem. You see, the Federal Reserve has the massive job of making billion-dollar decisions that affect every single one of us. But they're about to have to do it with, well, last month's news. Or, to be more accurate, no real news at all.
Here's the bottom line. The Federal Reserve is heading into its final, most critical meeting of 2025, and it is missing the single most important piece of data it relies on, the monthly jobs report. I mean, think of it like the main gauge on your economic dashboard. And right now, it's just dark.
So where does this all-important report even come from? Well, it's put together by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS. They're the ones responsible for gathering all this key data. And that means when the BLS has a problem, the Fed has a huge problem.
And this timeline here shows you exactly how this whole information blackout happened. It all started with a government shutdown in October, which just flat out canceled that month's jobs report. Then, come November, the BLS confirms that they can't just whip it up later. That data is gone, for good. This means the Fed walks into its big December 9th meeting without any fresh numbers. And the real kicker? The next report doesn't even come out until a week after they've already made their decision on interest rates.
And hey, you don't have to take my word for how critical this is. The Fed chair himself, Jerome Powell, calls this labor market data one of the key metrics they use. Without it, they're basically trying to navigate this incredibly complex economy with an outdated map. And that could make them way more cautious about making any big moves, like, say, cutting rates. But, it's not just a data problem. Things are getting messy. Let's move on, because the decision makers themselves, they're caught right in the crossfire. We're shifting from a problem with numbers to some very personal, very high-stakes drama.
And this lays out the battle perfectly. On one side, you've got the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, Bill Polta. He's accusing a sitting Fed governor, Lisa Cook, of mortgage fraud. Then on the other side, Cook's attorney is firing right back, calling the whole thing baseless and accusing Polta of misleading everyone. This is a direct, public showdown between 2 incredibly powerful figures in American finance.
And this is way more than just a personal fight. It's blown up into a political firestorm. A group of 8 U.S. senators is now demanding an investigation into Pulte himself. They say in this letter that his criminal referrals seem to have solely targeted prominent Democrats, and that raises some serious questions about whether he's using his entire agency as a political weapon.
And just to add another layer of chaos to all this, a totally separate ethics probe found that another former Fed governor, Adriana Kugler's husband, was making stock trades during the Fed's official blackout periods last year. Those are times when trading is a huge no-no to avoid any hint of a conflict of interest. Now, she says it was done without her knowledge, but it just adds to this bigger picture of ethical questions swirling all around the Fed's leadership right now.
Okay, let's zoom out for a minute, because this pressure cooker environment isn't just confined to the Fed. There is a much, much wider regulatory shakeup happening, one that's aiming to basically rewrite the rulebook for huge parts of the American economy.
First up, we have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. This is the agency that was born out of the 2008 financial crisis. It's meant to be the main watchdog for everyday consumers, keeping an eye on everything from credit cards to mortgages.
So what's the administration's plan for the CFPB? Well, it couldn't be more direct. They want to shut it down completely. A new director has actually been nominated with the specific job of just overseeing the agency's final few months before it's totally dismantled. This is a massive change in how finance is regulated. Next on the list is a rule with a kind of funny-sounding name, but with enormous environmental implications, WOTUS. It stands for Waters of the United States. And this little term in the Clean Water Act is absolutely crucial because it defines exactly which streams, rivers, and wetlands get federal protection from pollution. And just like what we saw with the CFPB, the plan here is a fundamental change. The EPA has proposed redefining WOTUS, and the new rule would seriously limit federal protections, especially for wetlands. It's another major piece of the rulebook getting a complete rewrite.
So, why the change? Well, the stated goals from the administration are to cut red tape and provide more clarity for businesses. And the group that really stands to benefit the most here is home builders.
They argue the current rules make getting permits difficult and slow. So it's no surprise that the National Association of Home Builders has been a huge supporter of this change.
So let's just recap for a second. We've got a data blackout at the Fed, we have infighting among its top leaders, and we have a fundamental overhaul of key government regulations. Now let's step back and connect these dots, because this is where we really see why all of this matters so much.
When you put all these pieces together, you get this really clear picture of a system under an incredible amount of pressure. First, you've got these data gaps, forcing the Fed to make huge calls with incomplete information. Then you have serious leadership conflict, with key officials tangled up in allegations and political fights. And underneath it all, you have this massive institutional overhaul, where major watchdogs are being either shut down or completely redefined on purpose.
And that leaves us with one final and really crucial question. With the economic dashboards dark, the pilots under fire, and the fundamental rules of the road being completely rewritten, just how stable is this system that all of us rely on? That's really the question hanging over everything in Washington this week.